It was supposed to be just another concert on André Rieu's American tour. Charleston, South Carolina, a warm summer night, folding chairs scattered across the lawn, families with coolers beside them, children holding handmade signs. The kind of relaxed atmosphere that typically marks outdoor performances in the United States. André entered the stage as always, smiling and greeting the audience, while the orchestra adjusted to the humid climate typical of the region. Everything seemed normal. But in the middle of the interaction with the audience, a little girl raised her hand and asked an unexpected question. It was not about music, nor about the violin. It was a direct, simple, and serious question. André's reaction and the way he answered completely changed the atmosphere of that night in Charleston. It was a brief moment, but enough to leave many adults in silence, absorbing something no one expected to hear at an outdoor concert. Charleston woke up humid on the day of the concert. The typical heat of South Carolina was already evident before 8 in the morning, and the production crew knew they had a long day ahead. André Rieu had arrived in the city the night before, coming from a sequence of performances in Atlanta and Jacksonville. The American tour usually had an intense rhythm, with short trips between the eastern states, but very full days. Even so, André started the morning as usual, reviewing the repertoire, a quick conversation with the team, and a simple coffee at the hotel. The concert venue, an open area prepared next to a historic park in Charleston, began receiving equipment trucks early. Drex, an American sound technician who accompanied the tour, commented on the challenge of the humid climate for the microphones and instruments. The orchestra would arrive later for the sound check, but the local crew was already working on the stage, setting up lighting structures and positioning chairs for the musicians. The city received many tourists at that time of year, and it was common to see families walking near the event location. Some carried folding chairs, a common practice at outdoor shows in the United States. Parents and children commented about André, especially kids who knew him from YouTube videos or broadcasts on classical music channels. During the early afternoon, André walked discreetly around the surroundings, observing the movement. He liked to see the audience arriving, especially on nights like this one, which brought together children and entire families. He noticed food trucks parked offering lemonade, corn dogs, and typical southern dishes. He commented to Mel that the audience seemed relaxed and that the night would probably be calm. The soundcheck took place in the late afternoon. The orchestra faced the heat with patience, and André adjusted small details of position and rhythm. When the audience began to occupy the lawn, everything was ready. The weather, despite being heavy, had the typical lightness of outdoor events in the United States, and nothing indicated that an unusual moment would happen during the performance. The tension in the backstage area was palpable, although no one said it out loud. Team members exchanged meaningful glances as they performed their tasks. Marine tuned her violin with more attention than usual, her eyes occasionally drifting to the door through which André would appear. She had seen him in dozens of concerts, under all kinds of conditions, but something in the air that evening felt different. Mel checked the schedule on his tablet for the umpteenth time. The timing had to be perfect, especially since journalists from various media outlets were present. He knew that any deviation from the normal pattern would raise questions, and questions were the last thing they needed right now. Outside on the lawn, the crowd grew steadily. Families spread blankets on the available spots. Children ran between the legs of adults, and the smell of fresh lemonade mixed with that of coffee from the surrounding food trucks. It was the typical picture of an American summer evening, full of expectation and warmth. But behind the curtains, the reality was different. André was still sitting in the small room, his head resting in his hands, breathing slowly. The humidity made the air feel thick, and despite the air conditioning unit working overtime, there was a heaviness that seemed to seep into everything. Drex had run the sound check earlier, and was satisfied with the setup, but he kept glancing toward the backstage area. He had been on enough tours to recognize when something was off, and today there was a tension in the air that he could not quite identify. The clock ticked relentlessly. 10 minutes left, then 5. André stood up, smoothed his jacket, and looked in the small mirror hanging on the wall. He saw a man who was tired but determined, with a spark in his eyes that refused to be extinguished, despite the exhaustion of weeks on the road. He took a deep breath and opened the door. The sounds of the audience flooded in immediately, a wave of voices and laughter that would normally give energy. Tonight it felt like a reminder of the responsibility he carried, the expectations of thousands who had come to see him perform. Mel stood ready at the entrance to the stage. Their eyes met, and an entire conversation was held without words. Mel nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture of support and understanding. André returned it with a slight smile. The introduction began. The lights on the stage changed, the orchestra took position, and the audience began to applaud in anticipation. This was the moment when André Rieu always transformed, when the tiredness disappeared and the artist came forward. Tonight, he would discover that the transformation would take an unexpected form. The first people arrived about 2 hours before the official start of the concert. It is common in the USA for the audience to organize early at outdoor events. Families set up folding chairs and towels on the lawn, while children ran between the aisles marked by the production team. The food trucks had lines forming, and the smell of barbecue mixed with the aroma of roasted corn. The atmosphere was light, unhurried, typical of cultural nights in the South. André observed this movement from inside the reserved area. The crew kept him informed about the flow of entry and about the presence of many children. He used to interact with the audience during concerts, especially in more relaxed situations like this one. He had the habit of walking to the front of the stage, chatting briefly with some people, and hearing spontaneous comments. Marin, violinist of the orchestra, commented to Drex that this night seemed more family-oriented than others on the tour. Drex agreed, saying that Charleston had this profile: welcoming audience, community atmosphere, easy interaction. André often said that performances like this had a lighter energy, and this became evident in his behavior backstage. As the sun began to set, artificial lighting took over. The stage lights contrasted with the still pink sky, creating an atmosphere typical of summer concerts. The orchestra tuned their instruments, and André circulated among the musicians, giving small instructions. There was no anxiety, just focus. Shortly before the entrance, Mel showed the latest updates. The audience was almost complete, the family section was packed, and a large group of children occupied the front left part. André commented that he might go down to that section during a break later. When the lights changed and the orchestra entered, the audience responded immediately with strong but organized applause. André appeared shortly after, greeting with a calm wave. He started the presentation with a light piece, ideal for the warm weather, and noticed that the audience responded well. Throughout the first songs, André alternated between conducting and brief comments. The audience laughed, applauded, and interacted naturally. Charleston had this behavior, respectful but warm. During one of the intervals, André walked to the front corner of the stage and noticed several small arms raised, children trying to get his attention. But something else caught his eye. In the third row, a man sat with a little girl on his lap. The man's face showed a mixture of emotions that André could not immediately identify. There was hope there, but also something deeper, something that looked like longing or perhaps prayer. The girl, maybe 7 years old, had bright eyes that followed every movement André made on stage. André noticed that the man whispered something to the girl, and she nodded seriously as if receiving important instructions. It was a brief moment, easily missed in the crowd of faces, but something about it stayed with André as he returned to conducting. The next piece began, a waltz that always generated enthusiastic response from American audiences. But even as his hands moved through the familiar patterns, André found his gaze returning to that father and daughter. There was a story there, he could feel it. In his decades of performing, he had learned to read audiences, to sense the energy that each person brought to a concert. During the brief pause between movements, Marine leaned toward him. "The section with children is particularly attentive tonight," she whispered. André nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about that little girl with the serious expression, wondering what she might be thinking as she watched the orchestra play. The concert continued, each piece flowing into the next with the practiced ease of a veteran ensemble. The audience responded with growing enthusiasm, the energy building as the evening progressed. Food vendors reported brisk business, and the atmosphere took on the festive quality that made outdoor concerts in America so special. But André felt a subtle current running beneath the surface of the evening. It was not anxiety exactly, nor anticipation. It was something more like the feeling before a storm, when the air becomes charged with electricity and anything seems possible. He had felt this before, on nights that turned out to be memorable for reasons no one could have predicted. Drex, at his sound console, noticed that André seemed more contemplative than usual between pieces. He adjusted the levels slightly, compensating for the humidity that affected the acoustics, and made a mental note to check in with the maestro during the next break. The first half of the concert moved toward its conclusion. André had planned to take a short intermission to allow the audience to stretch and the crew to make minor adjustments. But as he finished the final piece before the break, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of announcing the intermission, he stepped to the front of the stage and looked out at the sea of faces. The children in the front section were particularly visible, their eyes bright with the wonder that only live music can inspire. And there, in the third row, the little girl was still watching him with that serious, expectant expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," André said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the lawn, "I would like to take a moment to speak with some of our youngest guests tonight. They are the future of music, after all." The audience responded with warm applause. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders, and hands shot up throughout the family section. André smiled, preparing himself for the usual questions about favorite songs and violin techniques. He had no idea that the next few minutes would change the entire course of the evening. He stepped off the stage and began walking toward the audience. Security moved discreetly to create a path, and the crowd parted naturally. Children called out to him, their voices a cheerful chaos of questions and greetings. André stopped to shake hands, to compliment homemade signs, to share brief words with parents who beamed with pride. And then he reached the third row, where Kaysen sat with Arlie on his lap. The concert progressed without unexpected events, and André decided to get closer to the audience after a lighter piece. It was his custom, in some American cities, to walk to the edge of the stage and chat briefly with the audience. In Charleston, this practice always generated enthusiasm. Children raised their hands, held signs, or simply waved, hoping for a response. As he approached the section where several families were, André noticed the little girl he had observed earlier. She was sitting on her father's lap, holding a cup of lemonade, watching everything with attention. When he got closer, several children started calling him at the same time. Some asked to touch the violin. Others asked about his favorite music. Others just wanted to say, "Hi, André." The father of the girl, Kaysen, tried to organize the space so she would at least have a chance to speak. André had seen this dynamic many times before, parents gently encouraging shy children to seize a rare opportunity. But there was something different about Kaysen's expression. It was not just parental pride or excitement. There was a weight there, something that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult conversations. The girl, about 7 years old, was named Arlie. She had blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wore a dress with small flowers that looked like it had been carefully chosen for the occasion. Unlike the other children who bounced with excitement, she sat very still, her eyes fixed on André with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. When André pointed at her, expecting a question like the others, Arlie raised her hand slowly and spoke without hesitation. "André, is there music in heaven?" The audience did not react immediately. Many thought they had heard wrong. André, who was prepared for questions about instruments, repertoire, or childhood curiosities, was silent for a few seconds. His expression changed slightly, not from discomfort, but from real surprise. The words hung in the air like notes after the final chord of a symphony. Parents in the surrounding rows exchanged glances, uncertain how to react. Some reached for their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. Others simply held their breath, waiting. Kaysen lowered his eyes like someone who did not expect his daughter to be so direct. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Arlie's shoulder, a gesture of support and perhaps apology. Some people nearby adjusted in their chairs, trying to understand if the question had some previous explanation. But there was no story behind it that the audience could know. It was just a curious child, asking in the simplest way possible. But André noticed something that the audience could not see. In Kaysen's eyes there was a flicker of pain, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. And he understood, with the intuition that comes from decades of connecting with audiences, that this question was not born from simple curiosity. This question had roots in something real, something that this family was living through. André knelt slightly to be closer to her height. He did not smile immediately, because he realized it was not a question to treat with humor. The audience, now in silence, watched the scene with attention. Marion on stage noticed that even the musicians naturally reduced their movement. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. André was aware of thousands of eyes watching him, of cameras recording, of the weight of whatever words he would choose. But more than all of that, he was aware of this little girl looking up at him with complete trust, waiting for an answer to a question that most adults spent their lives avoiding. He thought of his own childhood, of the moments when music had been his refuge and his comfort. He thought of the audiences he had played for over the decades, of the faces he had seen transformed by a beautiful melody. He thought of what music meant to him, not as a career or a performance, but as something deeper, something that touched the places where words could not reach. Drex, watching from his position at the soundboard, felt his throat tighten. He had been on countless tours, witnessed hundreds of audience interactions, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The entire lawn seemed to be holding its breath. Moran gripped her violin a little tighter. She could see André's profile from her position on stage, could see the way his expression softened as he looked at the child. In all their years of working together, she had seen him handle difficult moments with grace. But this was different. This was personal in a way that most performances never became. In the audience, Sela, the local cultural reporter, had stopped taking notes. Her pen hovered above her notebook, forgotten, as she watched the scene unfold. This was not the story she had come to write, not the standard concert review she had planned. This was something else entirely. Bryn, the freelance photographer, raised her camera instinctively, but then lowered it. Some moments, she had learned, were not meant to be captured through a lens. Some moments needed to be witnessed directly, absorbed, without the barrier of technology. André took a breath. The humidity of the Charleston evening pressed in around them, but nobody seemed to notice. The food trucks had gone quiet, their operators pausing to watch. Even the children who had been bouncing with excitement moments before had gone still, sensing that something important was happening. And then André began to speak. The silence that formed after Arlie's question was not tense, just unexpected. Charleston was used to relaxed evenings, but a child's question about heaven created a rare moment at an outdoor concert. André took a few seconds before speaking. He kept his gaze on the girl, as if choosing each word with care. Without raising his tone of voice, he began by saying that questions asked by children usually have more sincerity than any others. He added that music had always been present in the important moments of his life, and that for many people, it is a form of comfort, something that brings people together instead of separating them. The audience listened without interruptions. There were no laughs, no side comments, just attention. Arlie watched André with a serious expression without hurry. He, remaining inclined so as not to seem distant, said he did not know for sure what heaven was like, and that perhaps no one knew, but that he liked to imagine that if such a place existed, music would have space there, not as a spectacle, but as company. If heaven exists, he said slowly, each word measured and sincere, then music must be part of it, because music is part of people. It is what we feel when words are not enough. It is what connects us when we are far apart. It is what remains when everything else fades. He paused, watching Arlie's face for any sign of understanding or confusion. The little girl listened with complete focus, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving his face. "I think," André continued, his voice softer now, almost intimate despite the thousands of people listening, "that music is the language of the heart. And if there is a place where hearts go when they leave us, then music must be there too, playing forever, connecting everyone who ever loved a song." The answer had no intention of moving. It was direct, objective, with the same simplicity as the question. But it was precisely this naturalness that reached the adult audience. Some parents looked at their children, others at the ground. It was as if the answer had reminded everyone that innocent questions carry a weight that adults usually avoid. Kaysen felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain composure, but something in André's words had reached past all his defenses. For months, he had been trying to find a way to explain things to Arlie, to answer her questions in a way that would comfort rather than confuse. And here was this man, this stranger, saying exactly what needed to be said. Ali considered the answer with the gravity that only children can bring to life's biggest questions. Then she nodded slowly, as if André had confirmed something she had already suspected. Her next words were so quiet that only André and Kaysen could hear them. "Mommy loved music," she said, "so she must be okay." André felt something shift in his chest. He understood now why the question had been asked, what weight it carried. He reached out and gently touched Ali's hand, a gesture of connection that crossed the boundary between performer and audience, between adult and child, between stranger and friend. "She must be more than okay," André said quietly, for Ali alone. "She must be surrounded by the most beautiful music you can imagine." Kaysen's composure finally broke. A single tear traced down his cheek, and he did not bother to wipe it away. Around them, other adults who had pieced together the context of the conversation were similarly affected. There were no sobs, no dramatic displays, just the quiet emotion of people who had been reminded of their own losses, their own questions, their own hopes. Ali looked up at her father and saw his tears. Without a word, she reached up and patted his cheek, the same gesture he had probably used to comfort her countless times. It was a role reversal that spoke of the resilience children find within themselves, the way they can become caregivers when the adults in their lives are struggling. On stage, Marin wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Several other musicians did the same. Drex, at the soundboard, had to clear his throat before he could speak into his headset to check on the crew. André rose slowly from his kneeling position. He looked at Kaysen and gave a slight nod, an acknowledgement between two people who understood each other without needing words. Then he looked back at Ali. "Thank you," he said, "for asking such a beautiful question. It takes courage to ask about the things that matter most." Ali smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her serious little face into something radiant. "Thank you for answering," she replied. "Most grown-ups don't like talking about heaven." A soft laugh rippled through the nearby audience, the release of tension that had been building throughout the exchange. André smiled too, genuinely touched by the child's observation. "Then I suppose," he said, "we should talk about it more often." He returned to the stage walking slowly. There was no need to comment on the episode with the audience. The answer spoke for itself. He just adjusted the violin on his shoulder and signaled for the next number of the repertoire. The following music began softly, as if giving natural continuity to what had been said. The audience accompanied with unusual attention. Adults who, minutes before, were talking among themselves or adjusting chairs, were now motionless. No one recorded the scene with excess of cell phones. Many preferred just to watch. It was evident that the concert had changed direction, not in the repertoire, but in the collective feeling. A child's question had transformed a summer night into something more intimate, and André, still processing the impact, returned to playing with a different focus. The presentation continued, but now marked by this simple and unexpected instant. The music that followed seemed to carry new meaning. Every note resonated differently, as if the orchestra had absorbed the emotion of the moment and was channeling it through their instruments. The waltz that André chose was one he had played thousands of times, but tonight it felt like a lullaby, a comfort, a promise. Shortly after resuming the concert, André noticed that the audience was quieter than before. It was not discomfort silence. It was calm attention, something rare at outdoor events, especially in the United States, where the audience tends to be animated and participative. Charleston at that moment seemed like an enclosed theatre. The following piece ended without interruptions, and André thanked with a discreet wave. He did not mention Ali nor return to the subject. He preferred to let the previous moment remain in its own space, without transforming it into discourse. The orchestra followed to the next music, and the audience returned to accompanying with unusual respect. In the area where Ali was, some people talked quietly. An elderly woman beside Kaysen commented that she had never seen a child ask a question of that kind at a concert. Another person, further back, said that André's answer reminded her of advice from old teachers. There was no emotional exaggeration. It was just spontaneous reflection. Marin, from the stage, noticed everything. She had a privileged view of the audience and could identify subtle changes among the musicians as well. The looks were different, more attentive, as if everyone sought to maintain the same level of sincerity demonstrated by André minutes before. The music gained delicacy, not by his direction, but by natural reaction of those who were playing. During a brief interval for changing scores, Drex noticed that the ambient audio was cleaner. Normally, in outdoor performances, there are inevitable noises, conversations, laughs, steps, chairs being moved. This time, almost none of that existed. It was as if the audience had entered an unusual state of quietness, perhaps still processing Arlie's question and André's answer. André noticed another change too. Many children were more attentive. Before, some moved restlessly, as is common. Now they observed the stage with serene curiosity. Their presence began to guide the rhythm of the night, almost as if the concert was also being conducted by childhood spontaneity. Selah had found a spot at the edge of the audience where she could observe both the stage and the crowd. Her reporter's instincts told her she was witnessing something special, something that went beyond a typical concert review. She began to write quickly, trying to capture not just what was happening but what it felt like. The families around Kaysen and Arlie had formed an unofficial protective circle. People who had been strangers an hour ago now shared knowing glances, united by the moment they had witnessed. A woman in the row behind them leaned forward and touched Kaysen's shoulder gently. No words were exchanged, but the gesture communicated everything. Bryn had finally raised her camera again, but she was no longer trying to capture the dramatic moments. Instead, she focused on the small details. A father wiping his eyes, a child leaning against a parent's arm, two elderly people holding hands as the music washed over them. These were the images that told the real story of the evening. At the end of one of the best-known songs, André returned to approach the edge of the stage, not to seek another question, but to thank the audience for their presence. The speech was short. He mentioned the heat of the night, the energy of the city, and the fact that Charleston always received the orchestra with much kindness. Nothing beyond that. Even without mentioning the episode with Arlie, the audience understood the subtext. There was something different in his tone, calmer, more contained, but not sad, just sincere. When the orchestra started a lighter waltz, some families stood up to dance with the children. This natural change helped restore the typical outdoor concert atmosphere, but now with an emotional layer that was not present at the beginning of the night. The audience returned to movement, but respectfully, as if they had internalized the previous moment and moved forward without losing sensitivity. Kaysen held Arlie's hand as they watched other families dancing on the lawn. For the first time in months, he felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the grip that grief had maintained on his heart. It was not that the pain was gone, but rather that it had found a place to rest, a context that made it bearable. Arlie tugged at his hand. "Can we dance too, Daddy?" Kaysen looked down at his daughter, at her hopeful eyes, at the smile that had been too rare since they had lost her mother. He thought about all the reasons to say no, about the eyes that might be watching, about his own discomfort with public displays. Then he thought about André's answer, about music being the language of the heart, about it connecting people even when they were far apart. He thought about his wife, about how much she had loved to dance, about all the times she had pulled him onto the dance floor despite his protests. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we can dance." They made their way to the open area where other families were swaying to the music. Kaysen lifted Arlie into his arms and they began to move together, not with any particular skill, but with something more important: connection. Around them, the other dancers seemed to sense the significance of the moment. People made room, smiled encouragingly, became silent witnesses to a father and daughter finding their way back to each other. On stage, André noticed the pair dancing. He could not know their full story, but he could see what was happening, could recognize the healing that music could facilitate. He caught Marin's eye and gave a slight nod toward the dancing pair. She smiled, understanding immediately. The orchestra shifted almost imperceptibly, extending the waltz, giving the moment room to breathe. It was the kind of musical intuition that came from years of playing together, of reading audiences, of understanding that sometimes the greatest performances happened not on stage, but among the people listening. The concert continued without hurry, and André conducted each piece with the same concentration, demonstrated from the beginning. But those who were there knew that this night was not just another on the tour. A child's question had changed the atmosphere, creating a memory that would remain among those present. When the concert entered its final stretch, The atmosphere on the lawn was completely stabilized, but in a different way from the beginning of the night. It was possible to perceive that the audience was connected in a deeper way to the presentation. André, conscious of this, chose to conclude the night with pieces that transmitted lightness and familiarity, avoiding abrupt changes in rhythm. During one of the last songs, some children stood up and danced in front of their parents. Ali remained seated for a while, looking fixedly at the stage. Kaysen observed his daughter with a calm expression, but still marked by the question she had asked. He knew it had not been just any curiosity. It was the kind of question a child asks when trying to understand something bigger than herself. The dancing they had shared earlier had changed something between them. For months their grief had been a wall, separating them even as they tried to support each other. Now that wall had developed a crack, and through it, light was beginning to seep. Ali turned to her father. "Daddy, do you think Mommy heard the music tonight?" Kaysen felt his throat tighten. A few hours ago, this question would have sent him spiraling into sadness, but something had shifted. "I think," he said carefully, "that wherever Mommy is, she knows we were thinking about her. And that makes her happy." Ali considered this. André said music connects people even when they are far apart. He did say that. "So, if I play music, Mommy can hear it?" Kaysen pulled his daughter close. "I believe she can, sweetheart. I really believe she can." At the end of the second-to-last piece, André thanked the audience again. He said that Charleston always offered him memorable nights, not just for the participation, but for the welcoming way people engaged with the music. The comment seemed generic, but in that context it gained another dimension. Many knew exactly what had made this night special. The last music began. It was a well-known piece, and the audience accompanied with soft clapping. Maram watched André and perceived that he maintained the same concentrated focus, but with a lighter countenance than at the beginning. The answer he had given to Ali seemed to have removed something from his chest too, as if it had allowed a moment of rare sincerity in the midst of an intense tour. When the music ended, André made the final bow. The audience rose in long applause, not noisy but consistent. It was a collective thank you, not just for the concert, but for the unexpected way the night had shaped itself. As he withdrew from the stage, André crossed again the path where Ali was. She waved discreetly, and he responded with a short and direct wave. There was no repetition of the conversation, nor need to explain anything. The moment had already happened and was complete. Backstage, Drex commented to Marin that this had been the quietest and most beautiful concert of the tour. Mel agreed, saying it had not been planned, but that some of the best moments came precisely from this unpredictability. André heard the comments with a discreet smile, without adding anything. At the end of the night, while the crew dismantled the stage, some families still remained on the lawn, commenting about the episode. Many adults affirmed they did not expect to be moved at such a relaxed concert. Some said that André's answer reminded them of old advice from family members. Others just said that the girl's question had been stronger than it seemed. Sela finished her notes with a sense of satisfaction she rarely felt after covering events. This was not going to be a standard review. This was a story about humanity, about the unexpected connections that could form between strangers, about the healing power of honesty and music combined. She found herself thinking about her own mother, who had passed several years ago, and about all the questions she had never asked, all the conversations they had never had. Ali's courage, the simple directness of her question, suddenly seemed like a gift, not just for her and her father, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Bryn packed up her camera equipment slowly, reviewing the images she had captured throughout the evening. The technical shots of the concert were fine, professional, exactly what she had been hired to produce. But it was the candid shots that held her attention. Kaysen and Ali dancing, the tears on strangers' faces, André kneeling to speak with a child. She knew that some of these images would never be published, that they were too intimate, too personal. But she was glad she had captured them anyway. Some moments deserved to be remembered, even if only by the photographer who witnessed them. The local press published short articles the next day. One of them, written by Sela, said that the concert had been marked by a moment of sincere humanity. It did not mention religion, nor did it treat the question with melodrama. It just recorded that André Rieu answered a child with honesty, and that this honesty had moved adults. The article spread quickly through social media. People who had not been at the concert shared it, adding their own reflections on grief, on children, on the unexpected places where wisdom could be found. Within days, the story had reached audiences far beyond Charleston, becoming one of those viral moments that seemed to touch something universal in the human experience. But for those who had actually been there, the impact was more personal. Parents went home and had conversations with their children that they had been avoiding. People reached out to estranged family members. Some simply sat with their grief in a new way, allowing it space without being consumed by it. Kaysen received several messages from people who had been sitting near them, strangers who had felt compelled to reach out after witnessing the exchange. He was surprised by how much it meant to him, this community of people who had shared a moment and carried it forward. That night, after putting Ali to bed, he sat alone in the living room with his wife's photograph. For the first time since her passing, he felt like he could talk to her without breaking apart. She asked about music in heaven, he whispered to the photograph, and a stranger gave her the most beautiful answer. I wish you could have seen her face, love. She smiled, really smiled. I think she's going to be okay. We both are. Charleston had many concerts that season, but few would be remembered like that night when a little girl asked if there was music in heaven, and André answered so simply that it became unforgettable. Months later, when André was asked about memorable moments from his American tour, he would speak about Charleston, not about the venue or the weather or the technical quality of the performance, but about a little girl named Ali, and a question that reminded him why music mattered. Children understand something that adults often forget, he would say. They understand that the most important questions are often the simplest ones, and they are not afraid to ask them. For Ali and Kaysen, the concert became a turning point. They began to play music at home again, something they had stopped doing after the loss. They talked more openly about their feelings, about their memories, about their hopes. The grief did not disappear, but it transformed into something they could carry together rather than something that separated them. And sometimes, when a particular song played, Ali would close her eyes and smile, as if she was listening to something no one else could hear. Perhaps she was. Perhaps, as André had suggested, music really was the language that connected all hearts, wherever they might be. The summer in Charleston moved on, as summers do. Other concerts came and went, other moments captured and forgotten. But in the memory of everyone who had been on that lawn on that humid evening, something remained, a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices, and that music, in all its mystery and beauty, might indeed reach places beyond our understanding. André continued his tour, city after city, audience after audience, but he carried Charleston with him, a touchstone that reminded him of why he had dedicated his life to music. It was not about the applause or the fame, or even the technical perfection of performance. It was about moments like the one with Ali, moments when music became a bridge between hearts, a comfort in grief, a celebration of the connections that make us human. And if there was music in heaven, as Ali had asked, then perhaps it sounded something like that evening in Charleston, imperfect, unexpected, and absolutely beautiful.